series where we're going to be tonight. If you have your Bibles, you can turn over there if you're not already there. Started the study of Daniel. Let's see, how many have we done? 1, 2, 3. This is number 4, I guess. Fourth lesson in Daniel that we're looking at here. Fifth, right? Yeah, okay, 5. The teacher don't know, nobody knows. So. We're about 5 deep in the book of Daniel. Going to deal with chapter 3 here tonight, and probably one of the more interesting stories in the Bible, one that we probably all know, and if you grew up, going to Bible class, one that you studied a lot when you were a kid too. And I think even as we get older, for some reason, there's just some stories in the Bible that continue to pique our interest. To me, this is one of those stories. Before we get too far into chapter 1, though, or chapter 3, we want to deal with the first question on our handout here, and that's kind of a idea of the discussion, and really it has to do with Nebuchadnezzar, and as we're going to read here in chapter 3, why would he set up this golden image and then command everybody to worship it? But question number 1 is this: what are some of the ways that those who are in positions of authority abuse their power over others? Okay, tell them what to do and when to do it. But if a person has authority over you, they have that right, don't they? Do what? Okay, abuse people. You ever work for a boss that's on a power trip? Sometimes because people have authority over you, they like to test the limits of that authority, and sometimes they like to tell you to do something just for the sake of doing it, to see if you'll do it or not. Not really that it's beneficial or needs to be done, but why would they do something like that? Makes them feel important, makes them feel powerful, right? You think about Nebuchadnezzar here, he had to feel pretty important anyway, didn't he? I mean, he'd have to feel pretty big because he was the king over the largest empire in the known world at that time. But one thing that you learn about people who are obsessed with power is, can they ever get enough? No. There's never going to be a point where they say, I'm satisfied, don't want any more control. And I think that's kind of Nebuchadnezzar as you read about him throughout the Bible. But he's going to build this statue we're going to read about here tonight, and of course command everybody within the empire to worship it. And 3 of those men were known to stand against that command, and of course we'll talk a little bit about what happened to them and Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to that. So question number 2 here on your handout, let's get into the text itself. What did Nebuchadnezzar make? A gold what? Okay. And what did this look like? Yeah. Himself, right? And was this like, a statue that they set on a shelf and everybody looked at? And yeah, it was 90 feet tall. And to kind of give you a little bit of perspective, I kind of looked up some historical monuments and structures, but at least if you Google it, and this is something that I found in a couple different places, so I imagine it's pretty close, but they said that from the feet of the Statue of Liberty to the crown of her head is about 90 feet. Now, not her arm. You had the arm. You got a pretty, I think 50 more feet added to it. But from her feet to the crown of her head is about 90 feet tall. And so think about Nebuchadnezzar and this great image that he built, of course, representative of himself. How long do you think this is into the reign of Nebuchadnezzar here? Doesn't really say, so we don't know for sure. Anybody got an opinion or a guess? Okay. It is kind of interesting. Now, remember when Daniel interprets his dream, we're pretty close to the beginning, right? Pretty close to the beginning of his reign. And what does he think about the God of Daniel at this point?
He said he was the God of God. He was the interpreter of dreams. And he was great, but he didn't give a time frame from the end of that chapter to this one.
Yeah.
If it was 2 weeks or 20 years.
Yeah. One thing that you kind of think about, and turn it down a little, fellas. It's a little too loud. One thing that you think about is, it's hard to imagine that these guys can go from, like we read about in chapter 2, where, they're recognizing Jehovah God, and, they recognize this is the God of Daniel and of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then the next day they wake up and they just forget all about it, But that Nebuchadnezzar was about that type of guy. When we get over into chapter 4, we'll find some more things about him, but I don't know for sure. There's a lot of people who do believe that it's probably later on in his reign, and it doesn't say for sure, but a lot of people believe it's probably around the time that he ends up completely destroying Jerusalem. And that, if that's the case, then that's about a 20-year period from chapter 2 to chapter 3. But if it is, I mean, you could probably understand why Nebuchadnezzar's feeling a little bit proud of himself. If he just completely conquered Israel and destroyed Jerusalem, and he's probably thinking he's at the top right now. So Nebuchadnezzar, what was he concerned about in the dream? Do you remember back in chapter 2? Yeah, the future. His future, his kingdom's future. And what did Daniel, basically that dream that he had, what did Daniel tell him about his future and about his kingdom's future? Yeah, basically, he revealed to Nebuchadnezzar that, he was, his kingdom wasn't going to last forever, right? It was going to come to an end one day. And so do you think that's going through Nebuchadnezzar's mind? Well, if he's this kind of king that is obsessed with power, I imagine it is, and I imagine his mindset and his process is, I'm going to do everything that I can within my power to keep that from happening. And so what I think as we look here in chapter 3, what he's trying to do, now remember, one of the things about the Babylonian kingdom is they really tried to bring everybody together under the banner of Babylon. We talked a little bit about Rome. Rome wasn't a world empire like that. They just kind of let everybody do their own thing. But Babylon tried to indoctrinate people, and they tried to relocate them into different places so that they could basically control them and train them to be good citizens within the kingdom of Babylon. One thing that I think, as you look here at Nebuchadnezzar, that he probably thought would further unify his kingdom is a united religion. Do you see that sometimes in these world empires? Yeah, get everybody under the same religion, and that brings your kingdom closer together. It unites it more. And so what better way, Nebuchadnezzar here is thinking, well, what better God could we have than me? Let's unite everybody under me. And was that uncommon in this day and age, to worship the emperor or the ruler as a god? No. That was pretty commonplace throughout these foreign empires. And so it wasn't a big step, for Nebuchadnezzar to go out here and to set up this image and then tell everybody, this is your God, this is who you're going to worship. So question number 3 here, who does he invite to the dedication ceremony of this golden image?
Basically all the higher-ups.
Yeah, and I use the word invite loosely because it really wasn't a come if you want invitation. It was more of a command, wasn't it? And all of his uppers, all of his political officials were required to come to this dedication. There's 7 different offices that are mentioned there in verses 2 and 3. But basically, if you go through there, that's every level of official that was assigned within the empire of Babylon. And so it represents the entire political upper structure of the empire of Babylon. Question number 4 here. So what does he command the people to do? Or what were they commanded to do? Yeah, this is more than just a political assembly, right? And here's a question too. Do you think Nebuchadnezzar informed these guys before they came what was happening? You think he said, we're going to come out here and you're going to bow down and worship this image? Kind of seems like at the beginning, at least, it's under the guise of a political assembly, isn't it? But it quickly changes from a political assembly to a religious assembly. You even have music that he puts into the ceremony too. But it is kind of interesting when you think about it. Nebuchadnezzar calls these people in. Again, there's nothing to me to indicate that they knew what was going to happen whenever they arrived there. But basically, when they got there, they found out at the sound of this music, you're going to fall down, you're going to worship this image, you're going to show your allegiance to me, and if you don't, what's going to happen? Yeah. Yeah, question number 5 here, the warning that the herald, the announcer gives to him is, what's about to happen here is going to be a matter of life and death. Would that get your attention? I think it probably would, all of us, right? And so he says, when you hear the music, you're going to bow down, you're going to worship this image, and if you don't, you're going to be burned up in the fiery furnace. You're going to meet a certain death. So, again, there wasn't any... there wasn't any vote and say, how many people want to do this and how many people don't want to do this. Is this a good idea or not? That's just the way it was. And, of course, 3 friends we'll read about here in a moment put their lives on the line by not doing what he told them to do. Do you think it was hard? Again, though, think about the mindset and the culture of this day and age. Do you think it was hard for people in the empire to do that? For most people?
No, he supplied them with everything. So
yeah, it wasn't like these empires were monotheistic empires either. Where they only worshiped one God. They had gods for everything that they worshipped. And so what's another God for them to worship? Most of them would have said, no big deal, right? We already have 25 we worship anyway. What's adding one more to the list? But a lot of them, again, they would have blindly followed. What do you think their main concern would have been? Survival, yeah. I would say that's probably what's on most people's mind. Yeah, I'll bow down to this image, no big deal for me.
What was the purpose of the furnace? Is it just to kill people, or?
Well, it could have been two possibilities, I think. Some people believe it was like a refining furnace, and I imagine it was probably a war furnace, is what I would deem it as.
Make weapons?
Yes, but to be able to process, those materials in mass quantities, you would have needed a very large furnace to do that, and so I think that's in part what was being used there. But it doesn't really say its particular purpose. It just calls it the fiery furnace, doesn't it? Nobody asked what it was, so I guess that everybody was familiar with it, knew what it was all about. But again, for most people, the majority of people today, they're going to do anything to escape danger and death, right? And so it wasn't a big thing to them. You'll even, in history, go back and study humanity. How many people were willing to sell themselves into slavery in order to escape danger and death? Thousands, if not millions of people. So for a lot of people, this was no big deal at all. But for 3 people that we read about here, it was a big deal. So question number 6. Why did the astrologers complain to the king about the Jews?
They wasn't doing it.
Yeah. So why did they care? It wasn't their image, right?
Well, they had to, so why don't they? Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, maybe they didn't think it was fair. They had to do it, everybody else should have to do it too. That's the mentality of some people.
Did they feel demeaned because the Jews were elevated?
That's kind of an interesting thought there, isn't it? I don't know how far removed this is from what happens in chapter 2 to chapter 3, but remember when Daniel interprets the king's dream, that Nebuchadnezzar puts him in a very elevated position, doesn't he? In fact, he puts him over the entire province of Babylon, puts him in charge, sets him in the king's court. That was a pretty important position for that day. Daniel lobbies for his 3 friends, doesn't he? And what does Nebuchadnezzar do for them? Puts them in very prominent positions within the city of Babylon, the capital, the most important city of the empire. And here's a question to think about. What do you think all those other people, and especially those who were native to that empire and country, how do you think they felt about having Jews in charge over them? They wouldn't have liked it one bit, would they? So here's a question to think about. Are these people still alive at this point? These people who grew up and went through that schooling with Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and see them elevated to this position, are they still alive at this point? Well, it seems like there's some kind of motive, doesn't it? For them, I don't think they were just tattletales. I think there was some kind of motive, and their motive was to get these guys out of the office, get them removed, get them taken care of. So, read about these 3 men. Of course, they stood tall when everybody else bowed. Why? Because they believed in Jehovah God. They believed in the one and true living God. That was the God of the Israelites. And I want you to think about the idea of faith. Sometimes people say, well, I believe in God. How do you know these men believed in God? Their actions, right? Faith is more than just a feeling, isn't it? Faith is something that manifests or makes itself known. And so it doesn't, it's not just a feeling inside of us. It's something that, as the circumstances around us change, manifests itself. And you see that in the lives of these three young men here. But it is an interesting question. Was this the same group of advisors, who were embarrassed? Well, first of all, they were embarrassed because why?
They couldn't tell the dream.
They couldn't tell the dream, couldn't tell the interpretation. Here shows up Daniel, this Jew, and he tells the king right off, no problem. Well, there's probably a little bit of embarrassment on their part and jealousy whenever Daniel interprets the king's dream. Go ahead, Kirby.
The word they're accused, if you look at it in Hebrew, it's a malicious accusation. It's not just, hey, I saw you done that. It's an intent to harm the person doing it. So that's pretty clear what it has to be. They were jealous, or they resented them. And you would resent a foreigner coming in and taking over your place. I don't care who you are.
Oh, sure. And especially if it was your home empire, you probably feel like they don't have any business, being involved in any of that. We do know, of course, over in Daniel chapter 6, when Daniel is accused. There was some ulterior motivation there, wasn't there? People didn't like Daniel, wanted him out of there. This is a little bit different empire. We'll talk about that when we get there. But nonetheless, I don't think any foreign empire would have liked a Jew in charge of any important position within their government. So I think there was some ulterior motive here in the fact that they were trying to get these guys out of the office, and this was a good way to do it. So question number 7 here. What did the king do about the complaint?
First, he was threatening them.
Yeah, how did it make him feel?
Rage.
Yeah, that's a good word, rage. Because when you study about Nebuchadnezzar, one of the things that he never got control of was his anger. Remember in Daniel chapter 2, none of the wise men could tell him the dream. What was he going to do? Kill them all, right? I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Even when they come to Daniel, even to the guys who didn't have a chance to interpret the dream, they said, "We'll just kill all the wise men." But that was Nebuchadnezzar. He was a hothead, and when he got mad, and everybody around him knew it. But he was. Bible says he was mad. He was full of fury. But let me point this out. I think he still had a special respect for these men, because what did he do? Yeah, he didn't kill them immediately, did he? That's would have been typical of Nebuchadnezzar. He actually gives them a second chance. And so to me, you read about these guys in chapter 1 and chapter 2, and they're whenever you're around these people, there's a certain respect and admiration for them. And so the fact that he gave them a second chance, that's kind of out of character for Nebuchadnezzar himself. Do you think he had forgotten in chapter 2 what he'd said about Jehovah God? You know, Steve pointed out a little bit earlier. He said he was the God of all gods and the King of all kings, right? Do you think he had forgotten about that, the way that he felt about him a little bit earlier?
I don't think he thought God was as important as him.
Yeah, and he arrogantly, what's the question he asked him? See the arrogant question he asked him there? Yeah, he said, "Who's the God that's going to deliver you out of my hands?" In other words, I'm the one in control, right? And if you're going to worship and serve some other God, who is it? And how's he going to be able to fight against me and keep me from killing you guys? But that's Nebuchadnezzar and his pride. Got in his way several times throughout his reign. So question number 8 here. How does Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond to the king?
Rejected it. We're not doing it.
Yeah, and this is one of the things, I think we talked a little bit about it when we studied Daniel and, you know, his request to not eat and drink the king's food and drink his wine. But they were calm and collected. I mean, do you think they were respectful as you read about them here? I think they were. But they were also full of faith, weren't they? And that's one of the important things to remember. You know, as Christians, we don't have to be arrogant. We don't have to be threatening or condescending to non-believers. In fact, I think one of the best things you can do is be respectful and be calm. But you don't have to back off your faith either, do you? And that's basically what you see with these three individuals here. Their faith was such that the only thing that they were worried about was obeying God. Were they afraid of the king?
Well, they may have been fearful.
Yeah. But to the point that it changed their faith? Affected their faith? No. Were they concerned about their own lives? Was that their main thought process and concern? No, it was obeying God, right? And that's what it means to be full of faith. You know, that's your priority. You put God at the beginning, and then those other things come after. But they basically told him, he said, "Who is the God that can deliver you?" They said, "Well, our God can deliver us." That's not a problem. What was the problem? Or what was the dilemma for them?
I would say if he decided to.
Yeah, they didn't know if he would or not, right? We don't know if he's going to or not. We know he can. And, I think whenever we talk about praying prayers of faith, a lot of times people read about this idea and they say, well, the Bible says if you doubt, you're never going to get it. I mean, who doubts the ability of God? Can God do this? I mean, yeah. What is it that what's our dilemma?
Whether it's the will of God or not.
Yeah. What does God want? That's what we don't know in certain situations. So you can pray a prayer that's full of faith. You trust, God can do this. You have all the confidence in the world. The question becomes, though, is this what God wants? Is this His will, or is it not? And so that's to me that helps me a lot as a human being, because I don't always have to know what God's will is. I just have to trust in God, leave it in His hands. And that was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can God deliver you? Sure, He can. We don't know if He will or not, though. We don't know what His will is in this matter. But here's what we're gonna. Here's the bottom line. We're not gonna worship that idol. Okay, we're gonna stay faithful to the Lord. And in the Old Testament, Jews had some pretty clear commandments about worshiping idols, didn't they? Go back to Exodus chapter 20. God said, "You shall have no other gods before me. Don't bow down before any idols." So there was some pretty clear-cut commandments that go back there for the Jews. But when God says something on the matter, it's settled, and that was their mind. God said not to do it. We're not going to do it. We don't care how much you threaten us. So again, I think they were calm and respectful, but they were also didn't hold back on their faith either. So what can we learn? Question 9 here. What can we learn from these men about authority when authority figures tell us to do something wrong?
So you have to have an appropriate response, but still stand up for what you believe in.
Yeah. Is there a right way to stand up for what you believe in? How many people are familiar with 1 Peter 3:15? Right? Be ready to give an answer to every man that asks you of reason of the hope within you. How? With what? Meekness and fear. There's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it, right? Don't need to be arrogant about it. Maintain your meekness. Have humility, but stand up for what's right and speak out for it. And that's what these three guys did. Great example for us. But also their attitude. We're going to obey God rather than men. Let come what may. Was their sole focus. We know how this story ends, right? We know that God intervenes, but kind of pointed out this idea a while ago. Sometimes we pray for things and we want things for ourselves and for others, but it's not within the will of God for that to happen. And so question number 10 kind of deals with that. How does God not rescuing people from their personal suffering often affect faith? Does it affect faith? Why?
Not what you thought was going to happen. It doesn't. In some cases, it increases the faith. In some cases, it goes away.
Yeah. And you think about what true faith is. True faith isn't just trusting in God because He delivers you out of every difficult circumstance, right? True faith is trusting God no matter come what may. No matter what the consequences may be. And that was the attitude of these guys. They didn't know whether God would deliver them or not, but they said, we're going to put it in God's hand and trust Him. We know He can do it, just don't know if that's His will or not. But God, a principle that you'll find in the Scripture, God always rewards faith, but He doesn't always intervene. And I think I've said before, if you've never read Hebrews chapter 11, I know we talk about it a lot, all those men, great men and women of faith. Starting about verse 37 and read about the others. Read about the others who didn't get delivered, but were just as pleasing to God because they had faith in God. They trusted God till the end. And so that's our job. All right, so question 11 here. What did the king order his men to do?
Crank up the furnace.
Yeah, this is, again, I mean, think about this logically. Okay, if you wanted to inflict as much punishment on these guys as you could, would you turn the heat up or would you turn it down? Nebuchadnezzar ain't thinking right here. Because the hotter it is, the faster they're going to die. You ought to just toss them in with a little flame, and trying to watch them burn. But his line of thinking, his rage, his fury gets the best of him. Heat that furnace up 7 times hotter than it normally is. And that was just Nebuchadnezzar. So what happens to his soldiers? There were some valiant men, some mighty soldiers, warriors, that bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and take them to the opening of the fiery furnace. What happens to those soldiers? It was the fire was so raging and out of control. As they approached that furnace, probably one of the swirling flames, hit them and it lit them on fire, burned them alive right there on the spot. But because of that, here they are. They're pushing these men toward this entrance. I mean, your natural reaction, I think, would be with the flame coming towards you that you would push, don't you, or try to get away. And so, as they're immediately lit on fire, they simultaneously push the 3 men, and they end up falling into the furnace itself. So, when Nebuchadnezzar looks in, let's go down about verse 14 here, or question 14, we're running out of time. Why was he so amazed when he looked inside the furnace?
They were untied, and then there was somebody else standing there with them.
Yeah. And think about the sanity of this question. He looks in, sees the 3 men. They're alive. They're not dead. He also sees a 4th figure in there, and he turns to his advisors and he said, "Didn't we put 3 guys in there? Am I going crazy here? What's going on? How are there 4 figures in there?" And at least to Nebuchadnezzar, maybe we should put it this way, what was the appearance of the 4th figure? Yeah. This is not a term like in the Hebrew that would identify Jesus Christ, but it's more appropriately it would be translated, he looks like one of the sons of the gods. In other words, what Nebuchadnezzar thought deity would look like is what this figure appeared to him as. And what does the king do after that? Yeah. He commands them to come out of the furnace. Do they obey? Yeah. I mean, he was the king. He was a guy in authority. I don't know that I would have been that gracious. I might have said something like, "Why don't you come in here and get me?" But they were respectful. He was a figure authority, and he told them, he gave them a commandment, and they obeyed that commandment. And question 15, what does the crowd observe when the men come out of the fire?
Their hair wasn't singed, and they didn't even smell like fire.
The only thing that the fire affected were the ropes that were binding. And And there was not one hair on their body that was singed. There were no black marks or burn holes on their coats. In fact, you couldn't even tell they'd been close to a fire. It didn't even smell like they'd been close to a fire. And so, in one act of faith, these three Jewish men became witnesses of the one and true living God to the entire Babylonian Empire. You think this was a story that got talked about? Yeah. But once again, it's God revealing himself to not just the Israelites, but to other nations too. So, all right, anybody got any comments?